Welcome to your daily dose with D. Morning, evening, lunchtime, snack, post-work, post-workout, post-sleep, post-nap. Oh, welcome to your daily dose of D, where I share a very few of my own thoughts and mostly share with you the other people's thoughts that I take into my brain, because I need other thoughts in my head other than my own, because otherwise they get lonely in there and then they talk too much and then I start to like only believe my own thoughts, and that's too much. So we have to make sure that we balance my own thoughts with other people's thoughts and, like, you know, find that nice little shared reality. Anyways, side tangent really quick. I think that's the other reason why I've never wanted to be famous, because I, as a person, do not desire that. However, I do have a desire that the ideas that are in my head, the ones that I have convened from the gathering of ideas of others and my own shared experience in the shared reality, and the combining of such, and that nexus point, that connection point, nexus, it's a really cool word, I enjoy it. That is what I want to be. I want to be the nexus point, the connection. I don't want to be famous. I want to connect the ideas, because I want the ideas to be famous in the sense that they are well known and popular. Because generally these are good ideas for the well-being of general people. But it's just, anyways. Yeah, so let's dive in. I'm feeling a little feisty today, a little bit in a mood. I had a slightly strange interaction today, and I am trying to practice bug loaf. The loaf has entered the building. Can we snag the loaf? Oh, we are all a little feisty today, aren't we? It's been a rough day. I don't know why. Can we not be stuck? There you go. You got this. Anyways, it was just a strange interaction, and I guess I don't want to go. I don't know why I'm talking about it. It's fine. He wants to go out now. You're a punk. Okay. That feels better. I'm always so interested in why in social norms, let's say that, and people's expectation that you are just going to perform the norms that they believe in, and when you don't, their willingness in their entitlement to then make so many fascinating comments. But anyways, I am practicing, what is it? Someone important told me recently that we Anger is a valid reaction. However, it is not one that brings in people or actually lends to learning. So I am practicing compassion and connection. An imagination of understanding, if you will. And anyways, we shall begin with screw it. Where is it? I think it's this one. Yeah. This is called Love Poems for Anxious People by Kenney. I hope it's Kenney and not Keeney. I apologize either way. This one. Here comes someone whose name I should know. We have met so many times, you and I, and yet I have no idea what your name is. As I stand, frozen, insane grin on my face. Do you have a name? Here you come, smiling, calling my name, as well as the names of my wife, children, and dog, Fortinbras. Which I kind of can't believe you remember. My God, you're almost here, and I will need to introduce you to the person next to me, whose name may be Beth, or Valentina, I'm not sure. Here's a quick thought, not about your name, but about the urge I have right now to just start running. That would be a weird thing to do, though, at a children's birthday party, but not as weird as what I do, which is stuff 2 cupcakes into my mouth, so as not to be able to speak, but almost immediately choke, spewing frosting on your face. Oh my God, Alan! Beth/Valentina shouts. Alan. His name is Alan, which I will now never forget. That was a gift from another very important person to me, and I really do. Great poetry. And let's do a quick little dive into the most recent Jacobin issue, number 43, fall 2021, Reason and Revolt, which is what at the top of all of them say. But this particular issue is called Lower the Crime Rate. And we are reading an article called Planned Paranoia by Owen Hatherley. There's a reason why urban housing developments and suburban subdivisions can seem threatening and unwelcoming to outsiders. They're planned that way in order to design out crime. Defense was always built into cities. From Beijing to Lisbon, cities throughout history were reinforced by castles and ringed with protective, turreted stone walls to secure them against hostile outside forces from outside. But it was only in the 19th century that their rulers decided to protect them from the majority of the people inside as well. It was an open secret in Napoleon III's Paris that the beautification efforts under its planner, Baron Haussmann, were predicted on the occasional need to shoot protesting workers. The wide boulevards intended to discourage barricades and create free fire zones. Oh my gosh, holy shit. I have not pre-read this article, and so I'm just like slightly like, holy shit, they designed wide streets to open free fire zones. That's fine, they just wanted to open fire on civilians. It's all great. Also, when I say it's all great, I mean that sarcastically, and I'm sorry if my tone does not say that. I am poor in tone. Dry humor, I believe it's called. Think of that. Yeah, just dry humor. Bad tones. I don't know. Anyways, it's not actually great. I mean that very sarcastically. Ironically. I think I mean that ironically, not sarcastically. I'm terrible at sarcasm, great at irony. We'll see if that's true. The wide boulevards, intended to discourage barricades and create free fire zones, were abundantly used in the suppression of the Paris Commune and became an inspiration to authoritarian city planners from New Delhi to Moscow. In the 1970s, however, a novel planning innovation emerged, which claimed to protect city dwellers from a new enemy, themselves. There was a sharp rise in petty and violent crime between the 1950s and 1980s, which happened to coincide with the mass construction of new public housing. As much of this crime happened to poor people in these places poor people lived, a link was made between the design of these new housing developments and the levels of crime. Jane Jacobs believed that crime was kept low in certain areas through natural surveillance created by eyes on the street, and that new public housing's spacious and open layouts discouraged this. This idea was gradually adapted into policy. The main figure responsible for making it a reality was the planner Oscar Newman, whose theory of defensible space made analogies with the natural world and spliced them together with observations of New York City Housing Authority projects. He argued that public spaces, owned in theory by everybody, would always be interpreted as belonging to nobody, and therefore criminals would prey on these inherently unpoliced and unpoliceable zones. Newman advocated breaking up the large green public areas of the new housing developments so that individuals or small groups of people could take ownership of the spaces. In theory, every housing project should become a series of castles where residents protected their little spot against miscreants. Against miscreants? It's like vermin. Oh my gosh. From the 1990s onward, crime declined, but the dominant explanation for why it had happened did not. In fact, the defensible space theory was written into law. In the United States, there was a crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED, and in Britain, secured by design, which specifically involved the police in the layout of housing estates. Oh my god. The British version, in a country where even the outer suburbs lack space, was particularly grim. Newman's analog in the UK was the geographer Alice Coleman, whose unit at the London School of Economics tallied up the number of feces and broken windows on housing estates all over the country. But the principal use of Newman's theories actually took place in the old colony of Northern Ireland. The start of the Troubles in the 1960s led to the violent breakup of mixed areas of cities across the 6 counties. Northern Ireland's Public Housing Authority built on this to redesign areas such as the Shinhill Road and Falls Road in West Belfast as groups of enclosed cul-de-sacs, one for each community divided by a peace wall. These tiny brick houses in introverted and closed layouts, protected from the other side and from traffic by tall brick walls, closely resemble the standard new housing estates in English suburbs. In the process, they made it apparent that this was military planning moving into the home. But while in Belfast, it was obvious who the houses were being protected against, elsewhere it was less clear. After a decade or so of secured by design in Britain, the writer Anna Minton surveyed the results in her 2009 book, the book is Ground Control, Fear and Happiness in the 21st Century City. In London and Manchester, she found bleak, barren new housing that actively discouraged the easy street life and happy accidents Jane Jacobs saw accompanying eyes on the street. Instead, the eyes were concentrated on single entry points to the new housing, making every unfamiliar visitor a possible threat, particularly if their racial or class profile did not match that of the housing estate. Added to this was the ubiquitous use of tall, often spiked fences, which demarcated the line between the affordable housing and the market-priced housing in new developments, and closed-circuit television, CCTV, cameras, which, after China, made the UK the world's most surveilled country. What was the effect of all this? In the new Labour era, when secured by design and CCTV were rolled out most extensively, petty and violent crime continued to decline sharply, falling year after year throughout the late 1990s and the 2000s. It fell especially dramatically in places that contradicted secured by design guidelines, such as 19th century grid-planned streets and 1960s housing estates. Yet, throughout this period, the fear of crime increased at a similar rate to the decrease in actual crime. Some explanation of this could be found, of course, in the scare stories of an inflammatory right-wing press, but Minton argued that urban design and planning had much to do with it as well. The defensible space planners had won. Many people did indeed act as if the areas they lived in were under constant threat from violent outsiders, even when the actual threat had almost ceased to exist. To each their own fortress. Fabulous. I always love those little tidbits that are like, oh yeah, no, this wasn't a happy accident. They planned this. Places are designed to not encourage actual, interaction. Oh my gosh. Whatever. On to a happier note. A yummier note with Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat by Samin Nosrat. We left off in fat, and we are now on fat and flavor. Fat's effect on flavor. Put simply, fat carries flavor. While certain fats have their own distinct flavors, any fat can convey aromas and intense flavors to our palates that would otherwise go unnoticed. Fat coats the tongue, allowing various aromatic compounds to stay in contact with our taste buds for longer periods of time, intensifying and prolonging our experience of various flavors. Peel and slice 2 cloves of garlic. Gently sizzle 1 clove in a couple tablespoons of water, and the other in the same amount of olive oil. Taste a few drops of each liquid. You'll have a much more powerful impression of the garlic flavor in oil. Take advantage of this capability to intensify and circulate flavor by adding aromatics directly into the cooking fat. When baking, add vanilla extract and other flavorings directly into the butter or egg yolks for the same result. Fat enhances flavor in another extraordinary way. Because cooking fats can withstand temperatures well beyond the boiling point of water, 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level, or 100 degrees Celsius, again at sea level, they perform a crucial task that water cannot: the facilitation of surface browning, which typically does not begin at temperatures below 230 degrees Fahrenheit. I do not know that calculation in Celsius. I would assume similar to 104 or 5. We can check it later. In some foods, browning will introduce entirely new flavors, including nuttiness, sweetness, meatiness, earthiness, and savoriness, umami. Savoriness is umami. Imagine the difference in flavor between a poached chicken breast and one browned on the stove in a little olive oil, and the incalculable value of this attribute will be clear. The flavors of fat. Different fats have different flavors. To select the right fat, get to know how each fat tastes and in which cuisines it's commonly used. I'll read this one. Olive oil. And we'll let the... You are very grumpy today. Definitely their food. We're just gonna wait real quick. Homie is just sitting right at the door, staring at where the crack is at the seam as if he can see out, but it's closed. Just staring at a closed door. Shall we continue? Olive oil. Olive oil is a staple in Mediterranean cooking, so make it your default fat when cooking foods inspired by Italian, Spanish, Greek, Turkish, North African, and Middle Eastern cuisines. It shines as a medium for everything from soups and pastas to braises, roasted meats, and vegetables. Use it as a main ingredient in mayonnaise, vinaigrette, and all manner of condiments, from herb salsa to chili oil. Why are you so fidgety? Furball cannot make up his mind. Drizzle it over beef carpaccio or baked ricotta as a seasoning. Your food will taste good if you start with a good tasting olive oil, but choosing the right one can be daunting. At my local market alone, there are 24 brands of extra virgin olive oil on display. Then there are all of the virgin, pure, and flavored oils. Early in my cooking career, I approached these aisles. I often found myself overwhelmed by choices. Virgin or extra virgin? Italy or France? Organic or not? Is that olive oil on sale any good? Why is one brand $30 for 750 milliliters while another is $10 for a liter? As with wine, taste, not price, is the best guide to choosing an olive oil. This might require an initial leap of faith, but the only way to learn the vocabulary of olive oil is to taste and pay attention. Descriptors like fruity, pungent, spicy, and bright might seem confusing at first, but a good olive oil, like a good wine, is multidimensional. If you taste something expensive but don't like it, then it's not for you. If you find a $10 bottle that's delicious, then you've scored. While it's a challenge to explain what good olive oil tastes like, it's fairly simple to describe a bad one. Bitter, overwhelmingly spicy, dirty, rancid, all deal breakers. Alright, you're done. You're in. I'm out. Color has little to do with the quality of olive oil, and it offers no clues to whether an olive oil is rancid. Instead, use your nose and palate. Does the olive oil smell like a box of crayons, candle wax, or the oil floating on top of an old jar of peanut butter? If so, it's rancid. Crayons, candle wax, or the oil floating on top of an old jar of peanut butter. If so, it's rancid. The sad truth is that most Americans, accustomed to the taste of rancid olive oil, actually prefer it. And so most of the huge olive oil producers are happy to sell to us what most discerning buyers would reject. Olive oil is produced seasonally. Raised on the American education system and production system. Olive oil is produced seasonally. Look for the production date, typically in November, on the label when you purchase a bottle to ensure you are buying a current pressing. It will go rancid about 12 to 14 months after it's been pressed, so don't save it for a special occasion, thinking it will improve over time like a fine wine. In this way, olive oil is nothing like wine. As with salt, there are various categories of olive oils: everyday oils, finishing oils, and flavored oils. Use everyday olive oils for general cookery and finishing olive oils for applications where you really want to let the flavor of the olive oil stand out, in salad dressings, spooned over fish tartare, in herb salsas, or in olive oil cakes. Purchase and use flavored olive oils with caution. Flavorings are often added to mask the taste of low-quality olive oil, so I generally recommend staying away from them. But there is an exception. Olive oils marked agrumato are made using a traditional technique of milling whole citrus fruit with the olives at the time of the first press. At By Right Creamery in San Francisco, one of the most popular sundaes featuring bergamot I want to say arrugato, and that's not it. It's agrumato. agrumato drizzled over chocolate ice cream, and it is delicious! Exclamation point. It can be difficult to find a good, affordable, everyday olive oil in grocery stores. My standbys include the extra virgin oils from Seca Hills, Katz, and California Olive Ranch. Another good everyday oil is the Kirkland Signature Organic Extra Virgin Oil from Costco, which regularly scores well on independently administered quality analyses. In their absence, look for oils that are produced from 100% Californian or Italian olives, as opposed to those with labels that simply read "made in Italy, packed in Italy, or bottled in Italy," which imply that the oil is pressed in Italy from olives whose provenance cannot be traced or guaranteed. The production date should always be clearly marked on the label. If you can't track down a good, affordable, everyday olive oil, instead of using a lower quality one, make your own blend of good olive oil and a neutral-tasting cold-pressed grapeseed or canola oil. Save the pure stuff and use it as a finishing olive oil for salads and condiments. Once you find an olive oil you love, take good care of it. Constant temperature fluctuations from a nearby stove or daily brushes with the sun's rays will encourage olive oil to go rancid, so store it somewhere reliably cool and dark. If you can't keep it in a dark place, store olive oil in a dark glass bottle or metal can to keep light out. Alrighty. On to A People's Guide to Capitalism by Hadas Thier. An introduction to Marxist economics. I said the word Marxist. Oh my gosh. Just listen. Chapter 1. The Birth of Capital. If money, according to Augier, quote, comes into the world with a congenital blood stain on one cheek, quote, capital comes dripping from head to foot from every pore with blood and dirt. Quote from Capital, Volume 1. 3 minutes of human history. Capitalism, we're told, is a natural, even eternal, expression of the human condition. It seems, the argument goes, that human beings are hardwired to be greedy, hierarchical, and inevitably organized into dog-eat-dog societies. A policy paper from the Cato Institute, for instance, explained, quote, property rights are prefigured in nature by the way animals mark our territories for their exclusive use in foraging, hunting, and mating. Quote, end quote. I am not doing. You are killing me. Sorry, I've antagonized them. He is. Oh my good lord. So antsy. Okay. So, a policy paper from the Cato Institute, for instance, explained, quote, property rights are prefigured in nature by the way animals mark out territories for their exclusive use in foraging, hunting, and mating, end quote. They concluded, quote, the human mind is built to trade, end quote. But capitalism is not eternal, and it is not intrinsic to human nature, if such a thing exists. An exploitative system of commodity production and exchange arose over time, neither inevitably nor smoothly, appearing on the scene only recently in human history. The first traces of modern humans date back to more than 200,000 years ago, but it was only in the last 5,000 years, i.e., during less than 3% of human history, that the first-class societies arose. Modern industrial capitalism surfaced just a few hundred years ago, i.e. in the last 0.25% of human history. In other words, if human history took place over the course of a single day, capitalism only unfolded 3 minutes before midnight. Throughout most of our history, humankind lived in hunter-gatherer societies, which organized themselves to meet basic needs: food, water, shelter. Agriculture had not yet been developed, and societies generated little to no excess beyond what was needed for day-to-day for day-to-day subsistence. There was no significant surplus to be hoarded by individuals or communities. Our ancestors tended, in fact, toward common ownership and egalitarianism, and organized themselves by and large into loose-knit collectives with decision-making dispersed among its members. As anthropologist Eleanor Burke Leacock argued, hunter-gatherer societies required, quote, great individual initiative and decisiveness, quote, among their members. Quote, decision-making in this context calls for concepts other than ours of leader and led, dominant and oh my gosh. I have no tea. Made anyways. Okay. As anthropologist Eleanor Burke Leacock argued, hunter-gatherer societies required great individual initiative and decisiveness among their members. Decision-making in this context calls for concepts other than ours of leader and led, dominant and deferent, no matter how loosely these are seen to apply. Just as greed and deference to authority are attributes encouraged in our current society, autonomy was a much more useful trait for hunter-gatherers. One example quoted by Leacock was the observation of Jesuit missionary Paul Lejeune, who came into contact with the Montagnais Naskapi people in the 17th century in Canada. I apologize if I am mispronouncing names. Please correct me and I will do better as I learn. I will also look up ones that I blatantly don't know or think I am butchering terribly. Yeah. He complained, They imagine that they ought by right of birth to enjoy the liberty of wild-ass colts, rendering no homage to anyone whomsoever, except when they like. They have reproached me 100 times because we fear our captains, while they laugh at and make sport of theirs. All the authority of their chief is in his tongue's end, for he is powerful in so far as he is eloquent, and even if he kills himself talking and haranguing, he will not be obeyed unless he pleases the savages. Why and how did it come to pass that hierarchical class societies arose out of communities that had been broadly egalitarian and enjoyed the freedom of wild-ass colts for many millennia? And out of these hierarchical societies, what were the historical conditions that paved the way for capitalism in particular to emerge and to eventually dominate the world we live in? These questions deserve their own set of books, and I will only skim the surface here. But from these broad outlines, we can begin to sketch out a framework that can help us to understand the anatomy of capitalism. From surplus to class. The story begins with the development of agriculture about 12,000 years ago. The advent of agriculture opened up the possibility of producing a surplus of food items, which could be stored for future need. Rather than the precariousness of hand-to-mouth living, the safety of that surplus on hand meant that communities could settle and grow, and some members of the group could specialize in the production of non-food items. Between the 3rd and 4th millennia BCE, towns spread across the globe from Mesopotamia to India to China to Africa. Throughout several thousand millennia, the need for supervision and control over these surpluses meant that societies became increasingly socially stratified. Initially, this was likely in the interest of the group as a whole, as it provided stability through the ups and downs of weather patterns and access to resources. But ultimately, those who maintained and supervised the surplus, and who would eventually appropriate this surplus through violence, taxes, or both, cohered into a social class distinct from the majority. It took millennia for conflicting classes, groups of people with different relationships to the production, ownership, and distribution of wealth and goods to form. We'll delve into classes more fully in Chapter 4. In the meantime, for our purposes here, note that various kinds of societies built upon these divisions, slavery, tributary, and feudal modes of production, and later capitalism, developed worldwide. This process was not smooth or automatic, nor one that came without resistance. Came about without resistance. There are many footnotes on this. Go buy the book. Or find the book. I am not recommending that anybody go on to, I hate that I can't look it up on my phone. Haymarket Books. I don't think that's right. I'll include it in the caption. The thing that I'm not, the site that I'm not recommending for literature and reading materials. Anyways. Capitalism's rosy dawn. Capitalism is one type of class society, the type that dominates the globe today. It first emerged in medieval Europe, where feudal societies had been dominant. Exactly how and why the transition from feudalism to capitalism came about is a highly contested and complex history, and beyond the purview of this book, but it's useful to examine what distinguished capitalism from feudalism in order to look at what makes capitalism unique. Feudalism essentially divided monarchic lands among local lords. Local lards. Also probably true on occasion, due to their beauty standards. These lords then... That's terrible. I don't actually believe that. I just thought it was a funny slip of the tongue. These lords then ruled over the inhabitants of their respective estates. I don't mean that I don't think that they weren't larger in body nature or fat because of their access to excess food. I just meant that I don't think fat people are lards, because that is a terrible slur in whatever form. It just sounds terrible, and I don't mean that, but it was a funny slip, and I thought that it was funny, and I don't actually think that, that. Anyways, whatever. We're moving on. Watch me get canceled. That was... I sound like the it girl. Pick me girl? Pick me girl. That one. Feudalism essentially divided monarchic lands among local lords. These lords then ruled over the inhabitants of their respective estates. Tied to the lords' estates, serfs, unfree peasants, were put to work. They had to pay their lords with money, or with a portion of their harvest, or by tilling the lord's fields for a certain number of days per week. In feudal society, peasants generally had access to enough land and tools to sustain themselves and their families. The lord's manor included common lands where commoners had rights to work the land and pasture cattle. As paltry as their subsistence was, it provided some economic independence. Because serfs felt no economic compulsion to work, the need for a wage in order to survive. It was ultimately the lord's capacity to mobilize force that prevented peasants from keeping the total fruits of their labor, or from fleeing bondage altogether. Because the enrichment of the lord was dependent on violence, this incentivized each lord to make ever greater investment in weapons and warfare, rather than develop new, innovative, productive techniques, much less tend to the social welfare of his serfs. When capitalism emerged, it developed a wholly new social order, one that required severing the masses of people from access to land, tools, and resources. Rather than a peasantry violently coerced to turn over goods to their lords, capitalism created a new underclass of wage workers, a class of people theoretically free to work where and how they pleased, but who would but who would in practice be compelled by economic necessity to produce a surplus for someone else nonetheless. Over the course of 3 centuries, from the 14th century until the Industrial Revolution of 1780 to 1850, the transformation of feudal relationships to capitalist ones created a system of production based on the exploitation of free wage labor, a social order of haves and have-nots. Neither the process nor the exploitative arrangement that it gave rise to was natural or automatic. As Marx wrote, one thing, however, is clear. Nature does not produce, on the one hand, owners of money or commodities, and on the other hand, men possessing nothing but their own labor power. This relation has no basis in natural history, nor does it have a social basis common to all periods of human history. It is clearly the result of a past historical development, the product of many economic revolutions, of the extinction of a whole series of older formations of social production. What were these past historical developments that created 2 types of people? One owning wealth and the means to generate more wealth, and the other owning little more than the skins on their backs? Classical economists like Adam Smith argued that capital came to be through a gradually evolving division of labor, where some people became traders, and some of these traders would eventually, through thriftiness or hard work, save enough wealth to build factories and employ workers. Marx mocked the conventional wisdom of mainstream economists of his time. This primitive accumulation plays approximately the same role in political economy as original sin does in theology. Adam bit the apple, and thereupon sin fell on the human race. Its origin is supposed to be explained when it is told as an anecdote about the past. Long, long ago, there were 2 sorts of people, one the diligent, intelligent, and above all frugal elite, the other lazy rascals, spending their substance and more in riotous living. Thus it came to pass that the former sort accumulated wealth, and the latter sort finally had nothing to sell except their own skins. And from this original sin dates the poverty of the great majority, who, despite all their labor, have up to now nothing to sell but themselves, and the wealth of the few that increases constantly, although they have long ceased to work. Such insipid childishness is every day preached to us in the defense of property. The division of society into haves and have-nots did not gently come to pass, and certainly not through the frugalness and intelligence of a small elite. It was the outcome of a violent upheaval, which forged large swaths of the population from their lands and traditional means of self-sufficiency. As we'll see, laws and coercive means had to be employed to discipline a new class of laborers. Further, political revolutions discussed below placed a new capitalist elite at the helm of states, which could systematically repress the struggles of the dispossessed, advance markets, and plunder abroad, and tend to other needs of the burgeoning elite. The violence, coercion, legislation, and upheavals necessary for the birth of this new system evince just how unnatural and vicious the road to capitalism was. And is. Where wealth accumulates and men decay. In England, where capitalism gained its first foothold, it did so on the basis of what's referred to as the enclosure movement. Millions of acres of common land were violently confiscated and turned into privately owned plots. Millions of acres of common land were violently confiscated and turned into privately owned plots during several centuries. Traditional rights to use common land for farming or grazing livestock were revoked. Land was fenced in, enclosed, and restricted to private owners, whether through payment, theft, or law. This is such bullshit. Yo, I hate history. I also hate reality, but you know. We keep pushing on. We keep surviving. We keep talking about it, and we keep changing. Nothing stays. Everything changes. That's a good thing. Through this process, land was concentrated into the hands of a few landowners, while masses of people were left with no means of self-sustenance, and therefore no means to maintain economic independence. Forced evictions of peasants left villagers landless and roaming the country seeking livelihood and subsistence. English farmer, journalist, and pamphleteer William Cobbett reported on conditions created by enclosures and disasters that befell everyday people who were left ragged as colts and pale as ashes. The day was cold too, he related one day in November, and frost hardly off the ground, and their blue arms and lips would have made any heart ache but that of a set seller or a loan jobber. The next day he came upon another village, where the laborers seem miserably poor. Their dwellings are little better than pig beds, and their looks indicate that their food is not nearly equal to that of a pig. Their wretched hovels are stuck upon little bits of ground on the roadside. Yesterday morning was a sharp frost, and this had set the poor creatures to digging up their little plats of potatoes. In my whole life, I never saw human wretchedness equal to this. Landowners benefited greatly from combining many small plots, which previously had been tilled by individual peasants, into large estates that could be more productive. Peasants, meanwhile, were obliged to pay rent and yearly leases, or be forced off the land. Many, unable to pay rent, became agricultural workers on large farms. Yet agricultural work did not keep pace with the growth of the uprooted population. Many more peasants were set free to become the proletarians or workers in burgeoning manufacturing towns. From the 16th to the 18th centuries, a new system of manufacture developed in the towns. Here groups of workers were assembled under one roof with machinery and raw materials, supervised, to avoid the common theft of raw materials at home, and paid a wage to produce commodities. Those that bankrolled the operations and reaped its rewards were the nation's capitalists. Those that bankrolled the operations and reaped its rewards were the nation's capitalists. The bourgeoisie, or capitalists, are the class of people who own the means to produce land, factories, tools, and materials, and employ laborers to do the work of production. The early capitalists were made up of merchants, lords that had become agricultural capitalists, as well as yeoman farmers, richer peasants who owned their land. In several northern French towns in the 18th century, for example, thousands of workers were amassed into factories to make wool fabrics. This process was global, though it happened unevenly across both geography and industry types. Where it took hold, it revolutionized production. According to anthropologist James Blott, cities dotted the landscape from northern Europe to southern Africa to eastern Asia. He recounts the emergence of a vast global network of trade and manufacture. Quote, in all three continents, we find relatively small rural regions. They were generally hinterlands of major port cities, along with a few highly commercialized agricultural and mining regions, which were clearly being penetrated by capitalism. Among them were Flanders, southeastern England, northern Italy, sugar-planting regions of Morocco, the Nile Valley, the Gold Coast, Kilwa, Sofala, and hypothetically part of Zimbabwe, Malabar, Coromandel, Bengal, northern Java, and south coastal China. For manufacture to advance, a rising capitalist class needed a counterpart class, laborers who could be employed whenever and wherever industrialists wanted them. These laborers had to be doubly free, in Marx's words, free from serfdom in order to be employed at will, but also free of land and the means to produce their own sustenance. On this basis, they could be disciplined to accept the terms of working for a wage. Marx wrote, for the transformation of money into capital, the owner of money must find the free worker available on the commodity market, and this worker must be free in the double sense that as a free individual he can dispose of his labor power as his own commodity, and that, on the other hand, he has no other commodity for sale, i.e., he is rid of them, he is free of all the objects needed for the realization of his labor power. As long as peasants and their families had some economic independence, obligation to serve their feudal lords was quite transparent. Landowners and the state had to physically wrest a portion of the peasants' harvest through rent and taxes. Under the guise of freedom and democracy, the new landless wage laborers were free to sell their labor power to whomever they chose or face starvation. Marx described this new setup as wage slavery. Quote, "The Roman slave was held by chains. The wage laborer is bound to his owner by invisible threads." End quote. He explained, quote, "The starting point of the development that gave rise both to the wage laborer and to the capitalist was the enslavement of the worker. The advance made consisted of a change in the form of this servitude, in the transformation of feudal exploitation into capitalist exploitation." End quote. Emphasis added. Thus, while Adam Smith was writing a capitalist manifesto in The Wealth of Nations, and other Enlightenment philosophers, economists, and writers were celebrating the rise of capitalist ideals, the ugly underbelly of this new wealth was making itself known. In 1770, just 6 years before the publication of The Wealth of Nations, Irish poet and playwright Oliver Goldsmith wrote The Deserted Village. His poem condemned enclosures, rural depopulation, and the explosive growth of wealth. It read, in part, "No more thy glassy brook reflects the day, but choked with sedges, works its weedy way. Ill fares the land to hastening ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. But times are altered, trade's unfeeling train usurp the land and dispossess the swain. Along the lawn, where scattered hamlets rose, unwieldy wealth and cumbrous pomp repose." And now we shall finish. Did you finally decide to calm down? He finally calmed down, settled down, curled up on the bed. On to The Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where we are still in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Chapter 6. Howl, howl, gargle, howl, gargle, howl, 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 gargle, howl, gargle, howl, howl, gargle, howl, gargle, howl, gargle, 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 howl, slurperg. Should have a good time. Message repeats. This is your captain speaking, so stop whatever you're doing and pay attention. First of all, I see from our instruments that we have a couple of hitchhikers aboard. Hello, whoever you are. I just want to make it totally clear that you are not at all welcome. I worked hard to get where I am today, and I didn't become captain of a Vogon constructor's ship simply so I could turn it into a taxi service for a load of degenerate freeloaders. I have sent out a search party, and as soon as they find you, I will put you off the ship. If you're very lucky, I might read you some of my poetry first. Secondly, we are about to jump into hyperspace for the journey to Barnard's star. On arrival, we will stay in dock for a 72-hour refit, and no one's to leave the ship during that time. I repeat, all planet leave is cancelled. I've just had an unhappy love affair, so I don't see why anybody else should have a good time. Message ends. The noise stopped. Arthur discovered to his embarrassment that he was lying curled up in a small ball on the floor with his arms wrapped around his head. He smiled weakly. "Charming man," he said. "I wish I had a daughter so I could forbid her to marry one." "You wouldn't need to," said Ford. "They've got as much sex appeal as a road accident. No, don't move," he added as Arthur began to uncurl himself. "You'd better be prepared for the jump into hyperspace. It's unpleasantly like being drunk." "What's so unpleasant about being drunk?" "You ask a glass of water." Arthur thought about this. "Ford," he said. "Yeah." "What's this fish doing in my ear?" "It's translating for you. It's a babblefish. Look it up in the book if you like." He tossed over the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and then curled himself up into a fetal ball to prepare himself for the jump. At that moment, the bottom fell out of Arthur's mind. His eyes turned inside out. His feet began to leak out of the top of his head. The room folded flat around him, spun around, shifted out of his existence, and left him sliding into his own navel. They were passing through hyperspace. "The babblefish," said the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy quietly, "is small, yellow, and leech-like, and probably the oddest thing in the universe. It feeds on brainwave energy received not from its own carrier, but from those around it. It absorbs all unconscious mental frequencies from this brainwave energy to nourish itself with. It then excretes into the mind of its carrier a telepathic matrix formed by combining the conscious thought frequencies with nerve signals picked up from the speech centers of the brain which has supplied them. The practical upshot of all this is that if you stick a babblefish in your ear, you can instantly understand anything said to you in any form of language. The speech patterns you actually hear decode the brainwave matrix which has been fed into your mind by your babblefish. Now, it is such a bizarrely improbable coincidence that anything so mind-bogglingly useful could have evolved purely by chance, that some thinkers have chosen to see it as a final and clinching proof of the non-existence of God. The argument goes something like this: I refuse to prove that I exist, says God, for proof denies faith, and without faith I am nothing. But, says man, the babblefish is a dead giveaway, isn't it? It could not have been evolved by chance. It proves you exist, and so therefore, by your own arguments, you don't. QED. Oh dear, says God, I hadn't thought of that, and promptly vanishes into a puff of logic. Oh, that was easy, says man, and for an encore goes on to prove that black is white and gets himself killed on the next zebra crossing. Most leading theologists claim that this argument is a load of dingo's kidneys, but that didn't stop Ulan Khilufid making a small fortune when he used it as a central theme of his best-selling book. Well, that about wraps it up for God. Meanwhile, the poor babblefish, by effectively removing all barriers to communication between different races and cultures, has caused more and bloodier wars than anything else in the history of creation. Arthur let out a low groan. He was horrified to discover that the kick through hyperspace hadn't killed him. He was now 6 light years from the place that the Earth would have been if it still existed. The Earth. Visions of it swarmed sickeningly through his nauseated mind. There was no way his imagination could feel the impact of the whole Earth having gone. It was too big. He prodded his feelings by thinking that his parents and his sister had gone. No reaction. He thought of all the people he had been close to. No reaction. Then he thought of a complete stranger he had been standing behind in the queue at the supermarket 2 days before, and felt a sudden stab. The supermarket was gone. Everyone in it was gone. Nelson's column had gone. And there would be no outcry because there was no one left to make an outcry. From now on, Nelson's column only existed in his mind. England only existed in his mind. His mind, stuck here in this dank, smelly, steel-lined spaceship. A wave of claustrophobia closed in on him. England no longer existed. He'd got that. Somehow he's got it. He tried again. America, he thought, has gone. He couldn't grasp it. He decided to start smaller again. New York has gone. No reaction. He'd never seriously believed it existed anyway. The dollar, he thought, has sunk forever. Slight tremor there. Every Bogart movie has been wiped, he said to himself, and that gave him a nasty knock. McDonald's, he thought. There is no longer any such thing as a McDonald's hamburger. He passed out. When he came round a second later, he found out he was sobbing for his mother. He jerked himself violently to his feet. Ford! Ford looked up from where he was sitting in a corner, humming to himself. He always found the actual traveling through space part of space travel rather trying. Yeah, he said. If you're a researcher on this book thing and you were on Earth, you must have been gathering material on it. Well, I was able to extend the original entry a bit, yes. Let me see what it says in this edition, then. I've got to see it. Yeah, okay. He passed it over again. Arthur grabbed hold of it and tried to stop his hand shaking. He pressed the entry for the relevant page. The screen flashed and swirled and resolved into a page of print. Arthur stared at it. It doesn't have an entry, he burst out. Ford looked over his shoulder. Yes, it does, he said. Down there. See, at the bottom of the screen. Just above Eccentrica Galumbits, the triple-breasted whore of Eroticon 6. Arthur followed Ford's finger and saw where it was pointing. For a moment, it still didn't register. Then his mind nearly blew up. What? Harmless? Is that all it's got to say? Harmless? One word? Ford shrugged. Well, there are 100 billion stars in the galaxy and only a limited amount of space in the book's microprocessors, he said, and no one knew much about the Earth, of course. Well, for God's sake, I hope you managed to rectify that a bit. Oh, yes, well, I managed to transmit a new entry off to the editor. He had to trim it a bit, but it's still an improvement. And what does it say now? Mostly harmless, admitted Ford, with a slightly embarrassed cough. Mostly harmless, shouted Arthur. What was that noise? Hissed Ford. It was me shouting, shouted Arthur. No, shut up, said Ford. I think we're in trouble. You think we're in trouble? Outside the door were the clear sounds of marching footsteps. The Dentrosis, whispered Arthur. No, those are steel-tipped boots, said Ford. There was a sharp ringing rap on the door. Then who is it? Said Arthur. Well, said Ford, if we're lucky, it's just the Bogons come to throw us into space. And if we're unlucky, said Ford grimly, the captain might be serious in his threat that he's going to read us some of his poetry first. Yeah, no. All right. This has been a lovely time with y'all. Hope you have enjoyed filling your brains with others' ideas as much as I have enjoyed filling mine with others' ideas. We are going to end with another poem. Love Poems for Anxious People by John Kenney, or Kenney. I'm not sure. Am I meditating yet? Am I doing this right, sitting here cross-legged, trying to empty my mind, or clear my mind, or not think, or just be? I forget which. The thoughts aren't real, according to the voice on the meditation app. They're just clouds floating by. Wait, does that mean it's going to rain? Whoops. Watch them go by. Soft, floating clouds. Smile at the clouds. Fake smile. Sadness. Whoops. Breathe. Be late for work. Get fired. Never work again. Become homeless and die on the streets in your own filth. Or balloons, the voice says. Thoughts are like balloons. Gently pop the thought. But if you pop a balloon, the sound is very loud. It makes children cry. I hate that sound. Will I ever have children? Sometimes I am impotent in the bedroom. Deep breath. Day 1 completed. Anyways, thank you for participating and sharing in this nexus point, this connection point, this sharing of ideas. Hope y'all enjoyed. See y'all next time.